Hey, everybody, it's Dave here and Darren over there. We're your two old vloggers, been commenting publicly on your Minnesota Vikings for over 2.5 decades apiece. It's a long time. And we've watched them for even longer than that. And it'll come into play today. But first, we're going to be talking about the Jalen Ramsay rumors. Is it a smart move for the Vikings to press for Jalen Ramsay? Is it the final piece to take them over the top and to the Super Bowl? We'll find out. Then this week in Vikingsland, we're talking even more trades. Most of them are bogus, but we'll get there. As well as a few other tidbits, including the fact that the Lions had their star center, Mr. Ragnow, announce his retirement. So bad for the NFC North. Oh, well. And then finally, the purpose of this show is to give tribute to the man and the legend in Jim Marshall. All next on Two Old Bloggers. Let's rock! Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikingsland with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey, Darren, we had to start late because you were playing tennis. Tell us how you did.
Well, it was just a pickup match. Tournament's next weekend, so
practicing. You're talking about practice then.
I am, yes. Got to get the strokes in shape, Dave.
Oh, okay.
Can't be losing in the first round. Got to go longer than that. Anyway,
you get any rain up there?
Very little, but that's not unusual. So, got a few dribs and drabs last week, but it's been fairly, I don't know, a little bit under the seasonal temperatures, not overly warm. So, haven't really gotten into the forest fire business yet, and we're hoping that continues.
We do too. Hey, I want to welcome everybody that's joined the show. I see Doc's in the house. Of course, Drewster's here. Raymond's here. We have, who else are we missing? We have Bulldog and T-Bass. Yes, and a disgusting act as well. And anybody else I missed, I apologize. But welcome for joining the show. And as you can see, we're going to be honoring the captain, Jim Marshall. But that will be later in the show. If you have any memories, feel free to share when we get to that point. But first, we got to do theme one. And theme one is, come on, David, hit the right button. Here we go. The right fit, question mark.
On Jaylen Ramsay. Yeah, on this show, Dave, it's not unusual for us to base themes off of speculation that may not have a whole lot, that may not be much with reality, right? But it's news cycle, it's stuff we talk about. And so one of the things that has come up as speculation, we haven't dealt with it here on Two Old Blockers yet, but the Real Forno show, and Tyler Fornes did, I think, recently, was the Jalen Ramsay and the speculation that the Vikings might be, he'd be a good spot. Minnesota would be a good landing spot for him because he is disgruntled in Miami, and Miami is looking to trade him, and Jalen Ramsay is looking for some reason to get out of Miami, even though he just signed a 3-year extension before the last year. I guess things soured pretty quickly there in Ramsay, but still want to get into it because I think it is an interesting topic. And, I think the speculation is largely driven by media look at the Vikings roster and the roster has had a makeover this offseason, and the Vikings have addressed some weaknesses. But I think they look at the roster and they look at what might be the biggest weak spot, and they look at the cornerback room and figure that, I think rightly look at that and say that could probably use some sprucing up. If you look at the cornerback room, Byron Murphy Jr. is the only guy there right now who's an established known quantity as a starter on the Vikings. Yes, they brought in Isaiah Rodgers. Yes, Mekhi Blackman is coming back from his ACL tear. Yes, Dwight McLaughlin, showed some promise last year in training camp, and the brief little times he got out on the field. Yes, Jeff Okudah is a former number 3 overall draft pick. But again, Murphy's the only guy that has played significant starting snaps in the NFL and is a known quantity. The rest aren't. And so if you're looking at the Minnesota Vikings, very strong roster, based on what they did in the offseason, Dave, they look like the front office, the coaching staff, with the moves they have made, with the roster they already have, this looks like a team that looks like it feels like they have a really good shot at going to the Super Bowl. And so adding a guy like Jaylen Ramsay, I think that is a way that you add him, you can really upgrade your cornerback room based on what it's there and help the Vikings get, even some, solidify that roster even more. So there's even less weak spots that can be exposed on your hopeful march to the Super Bowl. But the thing is that this is speculation because there has been no comments from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah or Kevin O'Connell about Jaylen Ramsay at all. You haven't heard anything from any leaks from inside Viking sources saying the Vikings are talking to the Miami Dolphins about Ramsay. They're very serious about it. So again, I think this speculation is driven by, again, looking at the Vikings roster and just seeing a cornerback room that could use an upgrade, and Ramsay is obviously available and he could be there. So I guess looking at that, looking at what might be I think that Ramsay would definitely help the roster, help the cornerback room. He's a guy that could help us get to the Super Bowl. He's not the guy he was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but he's still a pretty good player, Dave. If you believe PFF grades, and I know not everybody does on here, he had a 76.9 overall grade last year as a cornerback. That was 19th overall, I think, in the NFL, and it was 7th overall amongst cornerbacks who had at least, I think, 500 snaps. His coverage grade was 71.9. That's pretty good. It's not elite, but if you look at Byron Murphy Jr., PFF's cornerback coverage rate for him was 72.6. So he was only a little bit better than Ramsay last year. And his run defense grade was 85.7, which is excellent. So he can help the Vikings in the run defense. He's always been known as a solid, willing tackler. And he also had, according to PFF, 12 pass breakups last year, which was tops amongst cornerbacks in the NFL, according to PFF. Yes, he does turn 31 in October, which is a little bit long in the tooth for a cornerback, but this is a guy who is, again, maybe he's not the elite shutdown guy he was 3 or 4 years ago, but he's still a very good player, and I think a guy who can help the Vikings cornerback room and help the defense and help Brian Flores' defense. I don't think, people talk about scheme fits. I don't think that that's an issue with Jalen Ramsay. I don't think he'd have a problem fitting with Brian Flores' defense because I think he fits every scheme because he's that talented a guy. You run a lot of zone, Jalen Ramsay will be able to handle that. You want to go man and, do a lot of press coverage, he knows how to do that. Smart football player. I don't think scheme fit is the issue. There is always questions about, I think because the Vikings have in the past couple of years have traded away so many draft picks and they only had 10 draft picks in the last 2 drafts and only 3 of them were in the top 100 out of those 10 draft picks. So I think there's concerns about, well, if you trade for Jalen Ramsay, you're giving up too much draft capital. But if you look at the Vikings draft picks in 2026, they've got right now 8 draft picks slotted in, and they have 1 in every round and 2 in the 3rd round. 1 is a comp pick. They might get a 9th draft pick because Trent Sherfield has some maybe makeable play time incentives that he could possibly reach with the Denver Broncos that he signed with that could possibly net the Vikings a 7th round comp pick in 2026, which would give them 9 picks. But what I'm getting at here, Dave, is I think this year, if you're going for it in the Super Bowl, the Vikings do have the draft capital that they could trade for Jalen Ramsay, because I don't think it's going to take a lot to get Ramsey. The Dolphins have no leverage right now because everybody knows that Ramsey wants out and the Dolphins want to trade him. So I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah could work a deal where, kind of the typical, he gets Jalen Ramsey and a really late day 3 pick from the Dolphins, like say a 7th rounder in 2026 or maybe even 2027. And the Vikings trade away a couple of day 3 picks or one in 2026, late day 3 pick, and another one in 2027, a day 3 pick to make that deal happen. So I don't think that draft capital is an issue here right now. And that seems like a pretty, not much of a price to pay to get a player like Jaylen Ramsay. When you're talking about day 3 picks to do that. There is, I think, some of the issues that, so I don't think draft capital is really an issue with trading here. I think that the Vikings have the draft capital to do it. Maybe there's an issue but what might be the kind of stumbling blocks here? Well, one might be we don't know what the Vikings, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Brian Flores think about our cornerback room right now. Like I don't think it's overly strong, but Brian Flores might be very comfortable with right now running with Murphy, Mekhi Blackman, and Isaiah Rodgers as your top 3, with Jeff Okudah as the number 4, or maybe Okudah is the number 3 and Mekhi Blackman is the number 4, and you got Dwight McGlothern and a bunch of other guys behind him. Maybe they're okay with that. I wouldn't agree with that assessment, but that could be one reason why they're not interested in trading for Jalen Ramsey. Another issue, of course, is money. Jalen Ramsey's salary cap, he is guaranteed like just over $24.2 million, I think, next year. But the salary cap hit is only $16.6 million. But in the following year, 2026, it jumps up quite considerably. But also, I feel like this guy you've got pictured here, Rob Brzezinski, I always feel like he can figure out the salary cap stuff and make it work for the Vikings. So I don't think salary would be an issue. However, Over the Cap has stated that Vikings right now have just about $19 million in salary cap space right now, but they did say that in 2026 they're in the 3rd worst salary cap situation in the NFL, and so maybe even worse. So that could be, they might be looking at money might still be an issue, particularly in 2026, with all the extensions that the Vikings have signed with their own in-house guys the past couple of years, plus all the free agents they've added in, and those free agent signings, the money, as the contracts mature, they get more expensive, and so the salary cap might be an issue for the Vikings in 2026, and that might be one reason why they're not looking to bring in Jalen Ramsey. It's just a bit too pricey for them at this point. The other thing, and I don't think it's a major thing, but it is something to think about, is the weather. Jalen Ramsey grew up in Tennessee. He went to school at Florida State. And in the pros, he has played in Jacksonville, Los Angeles, and then now Miami. So he has never lived anywhere in his life where they get winter. And hey, some guys don't like playing in cold weather cities. I know Minnesota plays all their games indoors, but still you're living there full time. Who knows with Ramsey? I get usually I feel that, Dave, is that if you're a player who you're getting paid a lot of money and you're going to go to a team that's got that's a legit Super Bowl contender, you'll put up with the weather. But some guys aren't like that. So maybe that's a little bit of a factor too. We'll see. But I think those are the 3 things that could be holding up a Vikings trade if they're interested, that would make it difficult for it to happen. But having said that, Dave, I feel that, again, the Vikings cornerback room is not deep enough for my liking for this team. It could be a hole that could be exposed, especially if we have an injury to Byron Murphy Jr. and he's out a while, or one of the other starters, whoever they might be. And I think that Jalen Ramsey could, that cornerback room could protect it from injuries, guys missing games like Brian Murphy Jr. if it happens, and he improves the room. He's a very good player. He's the kind of player I think that teams who have Super Bowl aspirations, they pursue this kind of deal and they try to make it. And I think that the Vikings should be kicking the tires and seeing if they can work something out. Now, the issue is, I don't think the Vikings, there's going to be competition for Ramsey. He's not, other teams are going to be interested in him too because he's a good player, and other teams have Super Bowl aspirations. And so if there's competition, of course, that makes it tougher for the Vikings, especially if the Vikings can't take on as much salary as other teams can. And the Dolphins are going to be wanting to not take on any salary at all from his contract, from what I've heard lately. So a few things there that make this Ramsey to Minnesota thing speculation a difficult fit, but I think the Vikings should be, again, kicking the tires here and seeing what they can get out of it and if there's a deal to be made.
If there could be, they may be waiting to see if Miami just cuts him. Mm-hmm. Now, they do that, they're going to take a huge cap hit. They'll take half of it this year and half of it next. But it's a big cap hit. And if they do cut him, oh, yeah, I'd be on the phone in a heartbeat with his agent going, hey, come to Minnesota. And then, of course, whatever we pay him gets deducted from whatever Miami pays him this year. And plus he gets all his guarantees from Miami, so it's not like he's not going to get paid. I have a question, and I've heard, he's obviously smart enough. But could he be a final piece if he could also rotate to safety if necessary? Be the rover between corner and safety if there's an injury on either side of that, right? That equation, either corner or safety. He could be in the one that fills it. Now, whether he starts at corner, interesting question. You know, whether he's like Patrick Peterson back in the day. And he is going to be 30. He's getting up there, and we know corners is not a long-lived position, but there are a few guys that play it well when they get older. I'm just curious if he could play safety.
It has been suggested that that's one that he would transition to safety like Patrick Peterson did, and would make it, allow him to play longer than he could at corner. Now at 30 years old, not 31 until October, would Jaylen Ramsay, who's I think a pretty proud guy, be willing to make that move? That we don't know about that, but I think if you're bringing on Jalen Ramsey, you have those discussions and say, hey, we might need you at safety if Harrison Smith goes down, or Josh Metellus goes down, or Theo Jackson goes down. Are you okay with going there? Are you comfortable going there? Can we cross train you so you can be a corner safety kind of guy and move in there in case we have an injury? And if he's okay with that, then hey, you're cooking with gas. But I think you plan for that, because maybe the Vikings, even at his significant cap hit in 2026. Hey, again, there's void years, there's extensions you can do to push that money out and lower that cap hit in 2026 and even 2027 if you are looking at keeping Ramsey along and thinking, hey, he could be a very good safety for us in a couple of years, and that's where he'll play instead of cornerback. And at that point, Mekhi Blackman or Dwight McLaughlin or somebody we drafted, it moves into the cornerback role, the nickelback role.
Mm-hmm. It could be. I don't see them. Now, we're talking day 3 picks. That's fine. I don't care about that. I just don't see it happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before many times. So we'll see.
I just think that when you're the Vikings and you're in the situation, or what you've got the roster that you have right now, and the cornerback room's a little light on depth. I think that you have got to, and Jaylen Ramsay is a guy who's available. I think you've got to look at that and not depend on him getting cut by the Dolphins, and Lord knows what time, at what point the Dolphins cut him, in which case, how long does it take you, if you even if you're able to sign Ramsey, how long does it take him to learn the defense, get acclimated with the Minnesota, that sort of team, the city, the whole shebang, bring him in June, before, or late June, early July, before training camp starts. It's a consideration. I don't think it's a must-have, but I think that it's worthwhile for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings to at least look into this and see what is possible.
I think he's been around the block enough that he would basically know. It'd just be a quick translation of however it's called, the defense is called, and who's communicating it, and it'd be a go.
Yeah.
So, from that, and Tony, hate to see you go. Come back and watch Theme 3 in particular. That's the one I know you came for. And we'll get there. But have a good evening. Now, on to Theme 2. If I hit the right... Yeah, I did. That time. Don't bank on it further.
Yeah.
What the heck? This week in Vikingsland, and I turned off the slide. There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
This week in Vikingsland. Dave gets his shit together.
You got a lot on the go here with these shows. A lot of themes and visuals to plop in. So not everything is going to go silky smooth, but yes, few nuggets from this week's in Vikingland. And most of the time when we do this, we don't talk about the other NFC North teams in this segment, but I'm going to in this case because I thought a pretty significant thing happened this week with one of the other teams in the NFC North, and that was Frank Ragnow, one of the best in the business at center, suddenly announced that his body can't do it anymore, and he's retiring effective immediately from the NFL. And I think that it's significant because, the last year when the Lions were going 15-2 and winning the NFC North and getting the number 1 seed in the NFC, and they were tops in the league in points scored. I think 562 points they scored. Jared Goff has thrown for 4,600 yards, 37 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are just gashing teams offensively. The whole foundation of that, Dave, I believe, was the Detroit Lions offensive line, which I think was the best in the NFL. They gave Jared Goff plenty of time to sit back there and pick apart offenses without getting pressured very much. They opened, nice creases and holes for Gibbs and David Montgomery to run through. Not that they need a lot of help, but they were able to do that. And so now Ragnow has retired. They've lost their starting center. And they also let Kevin Zeitler go in free agency, who last year was their starting right guard, I believe. So that is 2 big pillars from that offensive line that are Alonzo from the Detroit Lions. And I don't think that's a small thing. Right now, the Detroit Lions starting offensive line, if ESPN's depth chart is to believe, is you've got Graham Glasgow taking over. You got Penei Sewell at right tackle. Next to him, you've got rookie Tate Ratledge from Georgia. Graham Glasgow right now is apparently going to slide over from left guard to center, taking left guard to be Christian Mahogany, who last year was a 6th-round draft pick just last year. And then at left tackle is Taylor Decker. Well, I think that's a much weaker-looking unit than what they had last year when they had Sewell, Kevin Zeitler, Ragnow, Glasgow at guard, and then Taylor Decker at left tackle. And now you've got the 5 I mentioned before. So it's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts in a way, Dave. And you take the loss of Ragnow and the loss of Zeitler, and you couple that with the fact that Ben Johnson took the head coaching job with the Chicago Bears. He's no longer the offensive coordinator in Detroit. And I just don't think that those 3 losses, the Detroit Lions offense, don't get me wrong, they still got a lot of talent. They're still going to score a lot of points. They're still going to be a very effective offense, but they're not going to be as good, I think, with those losses as last year. And that could be one of the not so small things that allows the Vikings, who've been looking up at the Detroit Lions for 2 seasons now in the NFC North, this narrows that gap, along with all the things that the Vikings have done in the offseason this year and addressing their offensive line and their interior defensive line. So you hate to see a guy retire like Ragnow. He wasn't even 30 years old. You'd feel like he had more football to give, but his body is just not allowing him. But it's if you're the NFC North, the rest of the NFC North, the Vikings, the Bears, the Packers, you are looking at his loss and Zeitler being gone and Ben Johnson being gone, and you're saying, this is great for us. This opens the window for us to make a run at the division title. And last year, the Vikings were pretty close to getting the divisional title anyway. But I think this is a pretty major loss for the Lions, and they're going to feel it offensively, and they're going to feel it next year overall in the whole year. And it's going to help the Vikings overtake them, hopefully. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but I think it's a significant loss.
Do you know what Kevin was saying here to Dan?
He was saying, stop saying that you're going to see me in 2 weeks, because the Rams heard that and they got mad.
That's right. Nah, but actually, if you translate it to today, he's going, you're screwed. Speaking of, poor Pittsburgh.
Yes. Well, poor Pittsburgh, but not poor us, Dave, because finally there's no more, is Aaron Rodgers coming to the Vikings, or is he just waiting, or when are they going to sign him? Boom. No more. Sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. And we're not going to have to hear Diana Rossini with any more he's waiting for the Vikings, or any more Rodgers to the Vikings talk. We're not going to hear that from any other NFL insider or media member. And I'm happy with that. Good luck with it, Pittsburgh. And by good luck, I mean, I hope that terrible luck with this, but even though the Rodgers is not going to the Vikings, we do still see them. It's going to be September 28th in Dublin when we play the Steelers. And now we're going to be facing Aaron Rodgers for the second straight year overseas. And we'll see how it goes. But hey, I just got to say, Mike Tomlin, going to be very interesting to see how Tomlin deals with Rodgers, the whole Rodgers situation. I just got to say, get the popcorn ready, folks. It should be quite the entertainment for with Tomlin and Rodgers on the same team.
I agree with you.
And I'm glad we're not dealing with it
wholeheartedly. And as a lot of people know, Fans First Sports Network, the first team that signed on, and a major part of it is the Steel Curtain Network. And I've got friends over there, and they're shaking their heads. Mm-hmm. No, not at all. Not at all. The only thing they think they can get out of it is Tomlin finally hangs it up after this season when he's had enough. Because, hey, one thing Aaron Rodgers is good at is getting head coaches fired. So
yeah, we will see indeed.
Now, speaking of one rumor dead, another one keeps coming back.
Unfortunately, Dave, no, you won't be hearing any more Rodgers to Minnesota speculation, but we continue to read Kirk Cousins to Minnesota speculation, which is just as annoying to me anyway. ESPN was the latest to do it this week. The worldwide sports leader had a story on Wednesday where they looked at potential trade destinations for 3 disgruntled vets: Trey Hendrickson, Jalen Ramsey, and Kirky Cousins. So Dan Graziano had the Vikings giving up a 2026 5th-round pick, a 2027 7th-rounder, and cash considerations for Cousins. Seth Walder from ESPN had the Vikings trading Sam Howell, who they just traded for themselves a couple of months, in April, and cash considerations to Atlanta for Cousins. Now, there were other trades proposed by other ESPN writers. Particularly, they had Cousins going to the Brownies and the Steelers. Well, he's not going to the Steelers anymore. in the end, the ESPN writer pool decided that Cousins to the Browns made the most sense. But the thing is that I think their reasoning mostly for making the Cousins to the Browns making the most sense was they felt that Cousins wouldn't want to go to Minnesota because he's not going to get he wants to be a starter. He's not going to get the chance to be a starter there. And so he would use his no trade clause if a trade to the Vikings was in the offing. And okay, that's fine. But here's the real reason why Cousins to the Vikings is not going to happen, because the Vikings don't want him. They don't want Kirk Cousins. They proved this already last offseason when they let Cousins walk. Yes, they made him an offer, but it was a lowball offer that they knew he would never take. And they signed Sam Darnold, who everybody thought was horseshit, including me, as a starter, and then they drafted JJ McCarthy to eventually take him over. They had no qualms really with getting rid of Kirk Cousins. So, and if I know a lot of people who don't watch the Vikings and don't follow the Vikings have doubts about JJ McCarthy. They think he's going to be the reason the Vikings don't reach the heights that we think that he's going to do. But if they were paying attention to what Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah have been saying all offseason, they'd know that the plan has always been that in 2025, JJ McCarthy was going to take over. And JJ McCarthy has done nothing so far, based on their comments and what we've heard about, to force them to deviate that plan. And they're going to continue to follow that plan. And JJ McCarthy is going to be the number one guy. And Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah sound very comfortable with going with JJ McCarthy as the starter next year. So, folks, please stop with the Kirk Cousins to Minnesota stuff, because it's not happening. The Vikings believe in JJ McCarthy and they're going with him, and they're going to see how far he can take them. And I know that's not going to stop the speculation, but it ain't happening. It's just because the Vikings don't want him.
Nope. And Kirk Cousins has approval on all trades. So whether he'd approve it or not, I don't know. I think he's just going to stick it to the Falcons and sit on the sideline and count his millions.
Yeah. We'll see. Like the Steelers would have been the other kind of obvious spot, the most obvious spot. And of course that ain't happening now because Aaron Rodgers has signed there.
Mm-hmm. Now I am hearing stuff out of Atlanta that they're saying the Golden Child is not playing quite as well, or doesn't seem to have progressed in this offseason like they thought. So Kirk is saying there, I'll be back starting. We'll see.
Well, yes, if the Falcons did some things, I think in the draft in particular, that indicate that they believe that they are a playoff team, and they're certainly not going to put up with, Raheem Morris is not going to put up with Penix struggling for too long and the season going down the tubes before they turn to Cousins, just like they did with Penix last year. So, I think Cousins, if he wants to start, he's at those practices too. He's watching what Penix is doing. And if Penix is struggling, I'm sure he's probably thinking, I'm getting paid here, and this looks like the best path for me to be a starter again. So, yeah.
Yeah. Just like, what's his name that went to Indianapolis?
Oh, yes. That's, Daniel Jones. Danny Dimes.
Because somebody's already hurt over there, and he looks like he's going to waltz right in.
Right.
Good for him.
Anthony Richardson. When he isn't calling for a breather to take himself out of a game, and he gets a shoulder injury.
Northfield, that is classic. We all remember Purple Jesus. It's an Adrian Peterson. And now JJ of Nazareth. I can deal with that. That's awesome. Now, but speaking of more BS out of ESPN.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
What?
Well, yeah. We mentioned Seth Walder had been part of that trade piece with Kirk Cousins earlier. One of the people who contributed to it. He had another article just over a week ago detailing what ESPN's Football Power Index, FPI for short, had to say about the 2025 Vikings. And for those who aren't schooled on the FPI index, it's a football rating and a projection model that ESPN has come up with. They launched it for the 2025 season just last week. And those projections are based on win totals from Vegas, the betting market, in conjunction with the team's schedule. And they look at other factors like how your roster is, like how's your team starting quarterback and your backup quarterback, all that sort of stuff. They throw that all in a blender, simulate each team's seasons like hundreds and thousands of times, and then they form their projections. And so after they did that, Dave, where do you think the Vikings landed on ESPN's FPI?
Probably middle, bottom, 15 to 20-ish.
You are dead on. 15th overall is what the ESPN's FPI index gave them. So that's behind the Packers, the Bengals, the Chargers, the Broncos, the Bucks, and the Texans. Make it make sense. I realize that the Vikings schedule looks pretty tough, but it's the same schedule that the Packers have. It's the same schedule that pretty much that the Lions have. The Bears were ranked 16th in that, just one spot behind the Vikings. So, this is all JJ McCarthy driven though, Dave, I believe. Again, people who don't follow the Vikings and haven't followed them over they look at McCarthy. He's a big unknown to them because he's never played an NFL game, but
they view him like he's a paraplegic coming to start for us. He can't throw a football. He can't run at all. He can't take a snap. And it's like, come on, guys. Where have you been? Did you watch him play in college? Have you seen his record? Have you watched the film so far? Last postseason, this postseason, the preseason game? Have you not seen all of that?
Yes. So again, Kevin O'Connell is a really smart guy and one of the best quarterback evaluators in the NFL, apparently. If these people are not paying attention to what he's been saying, they're not paying attention to what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has been saying and said again this week, they are 100% behind JJ McCarthy. They are 100% comfortable with giving the keys to JJ McCarthy. And so if these guys see him every day, day in and day out, hour after hour after hour, and if they were not confident in him, they would have made moves to reflect that. They have not. They have brought in Sam Howell to be the backup, clearly the backup. They didn't sign Aaron Rodgers. They haven't traded for Kirk Cousins. They didn't re-sign Sam Darnold. They have seen enough in JJ McCarthy to believe that he can play at a high level in the NFL and that he is going to succeed as our quarterback. And if they believe it, I believe it. I know it hasn't showed up on the field yet, but that's what they're saying. That's what the players are saying. And it's not just BS, Dave. You can tell when players are just going through the motions and saying things to be, say things that are not going to cause headlines in the NFL. The stuff that the Vikings players are saying about JJ McCarthy is not like hot air. It is legit, I believe, and it's heartfelt, and it's based on what they have seen from this kid in over a year of practices and OTAs and everything else.
And interacting with him all the time.
Yeah. So, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. Like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said, sometimes you got to make bets in this game, but you got to make a bet before you actually see it. But that's for every player in every position in the NFL at some point in time. You got to make a bet based on the information you have. And the Vikings have the most information on JJ McCarthy than anybody has. And they are comfortable with him being the starter. That's good enough for me right now. It may not work out, but I believe that it's going to. And so do they.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think ESPN and all those will all eat crow by the end of the season.
And we'll be here to talk about it, Dave. We'll be here to say,
we'll be saying, hey, what's that? 3 years in a row they said we're going to be this bad, and we turned out good.
Yeah. We'll be back. We'll be quite happy here. Two old bloggers back in in January or, late December when the Vikings have won 11 games or whatever it is and have won the divisional title, we'll be quite happy to tell you we told you so.
Northfield says we need to get Drew on before the games for a pregame rundown. I'm up for it.
That's right. Could always use a bit of the old Drewster's wisdom on here.
Yep. So, all right. That ends theme 2. What comes after theme 2?
Theme 3.
This one is about Captain Jim.
It is 99.999999% of the time when we talk about when we get on here to talk about Viking stuff and our themes, we're just can't wait to talk about it. We're quite happy to talk about it. This is not one of those times because this week, unfortunately, we learned that Jim Marshall, the captain, one of the Vikings legends, one of the franchise cornerstones, passed away. And for me, Dave, I'll be turning 56 in July, but Jim Marshall was just a little bit I was just a little bit too young to really remember Jim Marshall's playing days. Like he was when he retired in 1979. I was still 10 years old. So don't have really any memories of watching him play, but nonetheless, being a longtime Vikings fan, I still consider him a legend. Like one of the cornerstones of this franchise. And any serious Vikings fan, whether you're my age, older, younger, much younger, you also know who Jim Marshall is. And you know what he did for the Vikings and what he meant to the franchise. And so this loss really stings for me. Because this guy was a phenomenal football player and a phenomenal human being. And a lot of times you don't get both of those, right? And I think just everybody here on the chat is well aware of all of his accomplishments, like the 290 consecutive games, the 270 starts, playing in all 4 Super Bowls where he was a starter in all of them. The tied for the NFL record in fumble recoveries, the 133.5 sacks, or 130 points, which at the time when he retired was the 3rd most in the NFL. It was just like this guy, the productivity, the longevity, the durability of Jim Marshall, it is unmatched for a defensive lineman, probably for a defensive player. Place kickers and quarterbacks played 20 years in the league, but defensive linemen, nope. And they certainly don't play 270 starts. They certainly don't play 290 games, never miss a practice, never missed a game. Jim Marshall did all those things. And the whole, and we saw this in some of the Vikings videos that came out honoring Jim Marshall this week from guys like Fran Tarkenton. But when we talk about the Vikings greats, like Jim Marshall was part of that franchise, the most successful era of the Vikings franchise, when they were dominant, when they won the division every single year, when they went to the Super Bowl or NFC Championship seemingly every single year in the late 60s and the early to mid 70s. That has been the greatest Vikings era ever, and we have never reached that level of dominance since, unfortunately.
For a couple of seasons here and there, but
not sustained excellence like that. And there's lots of guys that got a lot of pub during that time. Fran Tarkenton was one of them. Like Carl Eller was one of them. Alan Page was one of them. Joe Kapp. Those types of players, and deservedly so. But Jim Marshall was every bit a big part of that Vikings lore and establishing what it meant. Chuck Foreman's another one. What it meant to be a Viking. To me, Jim Marshall, Paul Krause, to me, Bobby Bryant, those kind of guys. But Jim Marshall to me was the epitome of what a Minnesota Viking should be. And tough, durable, productive, and a great person too. And so, and you got to think about it too, he was part of, yes, Eller and Page were the headliners, it seemed, but that him Carl Eller, Alan Page, Gary Larson, and Jim Marshall, they were part of the most dominant defensive line the NFL has ever seen for a long stretch of time. Some people might say it was the fearsome foursome. Maybe it's my lack of Rams knowledge, but I don't think the fearsome foursome was as good as long as the Vikings front four was.
Some would argue the steel curtain, but
yes. But that line, as dominant as it was for as long as it was, it inspired one of the most famous nicknames in pro sports, not just in football, the Purple People Eaters. If you are even most casual sports fans have heard what the Purple People Eaters are. They've heard that. They know it was the Minnesota Vikings. A lot of people would know like several of the most of the four guys who played for that, including Jim Marshall. And Jim Marshall was the leader of that group and an excellent player in his own right. So again, like that is why Jim Marshall is a legend. That is why he is what Minnesota Vikings are Jim Marshall, I believe. And so that is why this loss stings so much for me and for so many Vikings fans. And I don't want to get into the Hall of Fame stuff because we've talked about it, but I'm going to get into it.
We did a show specifically on it 2 years ago.
We did.
It still irks me to no end.
And this week, as he passed away, Vikings writers who cover the team on a regular basis, they started, made some pretty strong cases for why Jim Marshall should be in the Hall of Fame, along with people like Joe Klecko, who I don't think was as good a player as Jim Marshall was for as long as he was, but somehow he got in. And it's a subjective thing. We know that. But okay, he wasn't in when he was alive. If he somehow gets in after he's passed away, I'll take it because it would recognize the kind of player Jim Marshall was, but I'll also be pretty pissed at if that happens in a way, because why couldn't you do it when he was alive and enjoyed it and recognize him? And like Vikings fans don't need your pity after he passes away, that you put him in a pity party, put him in, because he deserved it. Sure. But I don't think the pity party we don't need. We know what Jim Marshall meant to the Minnesota Vikings. We know how good of a player Jim Marshall was. We know what Jim Marshall meant to us Vikings fans. And I guess the fact that he isn't in the Hall of Fame right now, they can't take that away from us. So sad time. Maybe Jim will get his due in the Hall of Fame at some point in time, but we got to pay tribute to one of the guys who built what the Minnesota Vikings are today. Dave, time for you to chime in and your thoughts on Captain Jim.
Jim was tough. Now, I'm a little bit older than Darren. I'm going to be 62 this year in October. I went to my first game in 69 at the old Met. Played the Bears. We beat the Bears. I remember watching the Vikings as I was playing Pop Warner football in junior high and high school. And I wore every single number of the Purple People Eaters across the board. 70 when I played tackle, 80, 81, 82 when I played tight end. It's in defensive end. But Jim Marshall was always there. He was, as the coach said, special. And all the stories we heard this week of the different things he did, I remember seeing special on him or TV watching, and hey, Jim Marshall skydiving, and they show him jumping out of an airplane, right? On the ABC Wild World of Sports or something like that. And or sled dogging or things like that. He lived life to the fullest, absolutely fullest. Came close to dying a few times because of injuries and other stuff. Heard the wildest story this week about which game was it? Where he came out, he had bronchial asthma and had it all week. And he turned up at the last minute to play. And played well during the game. Had a banger game. He could barely breathe. It's just, he was a man's man, like I said on Tyler's show. He was, without a doubt, what everybody wanted to be. On the field, brilliant, fast. He was a speed defensive end. He was light compared to some of the bigger tackles of the day. Light guys don't last, right? Because they lose their speed, their game speed. Jim Marshall lasted. He played 20 years and was still at the top of his game and still racked up the third most sacks. Why the Hall of Fame hasn't got him in, it just irritates me to no end. But do you know that of the retired numbers by the Vikings, there are 6 of them? Fran Tarkenton's number 10, Mick Tingelhoff, Jim Marshall, Corey Stringer, Chris Carter, and Alan Page. All those numbers are retired. So with the adding of the 0 to the number availability, we have 4 available numbers beyond the 90 that we could use. Of those 6 that are retired, all but 2 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. Corey Stringer isn't, because Corey Stringer died of heat stroke during training camp. He was well on the way to have a great career, but he wasn't. Jim Marshall should be in the Hall of Fame. He's not. But he means so much to the team and to me that they retired his number. And well-deserved. And the team has done a lot for Jim. They bring him in. He does a lot for the team. Not to mention his off-the-field work, where he helped inner-city youth, and that organization still is doing that. But whether it was his play on the field or just his life, he demonstrated what it could be to be a man and believe what you do and believe in excellence and give it all you got, all you have, all the time. And that to me was an influence growing up. It was one of a few that I took. Hey, it is what it is. I hate to see him go. But the captain, who, like I said, Coach Grant said was special and had leadership quality in spades, now he gets to join the coach, which is good. You talked about there's a lot of those folks getting up there in age, whether it be Tarkenton or even Foreman. Eller's still kicking it. We're going to be losing more and more of them, and it's
yes,
hard.
We are.
Drew says a defensive end can't play that many games. A defensive player can't play that many games consecutively. Nobody has. He owns that record and will own that record, Drew. Yeah, you could get a quarterback like Brett Favre that beat him, or you can get a punter that beats him. But you're not going to get a defensive player, especially a defensive end. Now, he's one of a kind. Alan Page said of him, Jim was the heart and soul of the Minnesota Vikings. It was a high honor to play next to him. Fran said, Jim set the tone for how this franchise is today. And we can see that. Today, what Jim believed is in the team. The Wilfs have adopted that. We have the captain's wall now. When you first walk into TCO, you see it. And it's because he was the longest-serving captain in team history. He deserved it. Heck, when Coach Grant calls him his captain, that means something. Paul Wiggin, former teammate and coach. Jim was the most natural and best football player he ever saw. He studied his game film when he became a coach. That's something to watch. I mean, anytime a coach says, I go all the way back and I look at what he did and implement it today. Now, Paul Wiggin is way older than that, but there are probably coaches, and I remember under Zimmer, they went back all and watched Purple People Eaters because you might learn something. Heck, if you could be as fast around the corner as Jim was, as tenacious, the never stop motor to get after the quarterback. I have a favorite picture. Now it was of Eller chasing Tom Henry. But Jim was that way. He led by example. And just about everybody else on the line is in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. 4 Super Bowls. Helped leading the team too. Steve Sable of NFL Films, the great voice and founder. No player in history played harder or longer than Jim Marshall. Drew says, hey, 128 sacks. Drew, like I said on chat, depends on where you're getting the number. There are folks that have called it 130 and a half and 131 and a half, and I've seen 132. Going back and watching all the film. That is outstanding. Especially considered everybody else across that line was up there in numbers, all except for Larson, who was respectable. But Eller and Page were up there too. Now, did he have his best years there at the end for sacks? No. But was he still contributing and making a difference? Oh, hell yes, he was. And was he getting sacks? Oh, yes, he was. It was just, he's going to be missed. Mm-hmm. Mark Wilf even came out and said, and I credit our current ownership for inviting the Vikes veterans back, and they bring them back and they talk to the team. Jim was always part of that. Mark Wilf said, no player lived the ideas of toughness, camaraderie, and passion than the all-time Iron Man. And they didn't. They absolutely didn't. Jim Marshall, our captain. Rest in peace. Till Valhalla.